Donald Trump crashed the Granite state's primary party, winning big against Nikki Haley. President Biden won big too, crushing long-shot challenger Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips. After New Hampshire, it certainly looks like voters are one step closer to what polls show they really don't want: a rematch of the 2020 presidential race.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Is America marching towards another Biden-Trump showdown? In moderate New Hampshire, Nikki Haley, the last major Republican challenger left, couldn't pry enough votes away from Donald Trump. The former president beat Haley 55 to 43%. On the Democratic side, despite being a write-in candidate, President Joe Biden crushed Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips by over 30 points. Tonight, we'll break down the New Hampshire results, and we'll look ahead to key contests in the next few weeks, including Super Tuesday on March 5th, when 16 states, including Minnesota, vote. Let's start with Professor Larry Jacobs of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Joining us right now is Professor Larry Jacobs at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good to be with you.
All right, New Hampshire results. What's the breakdown?
I think this was an important win for Donald Trump, but it came up far short of chasing Nikki Haley out of the race. Polls before New Hampshire showed him up by about 20 points, and she's going to be about half of that. That's I think a significant step forward for her, with real opportunities moving forward.
All right, let's stay with the Republicans here. It's still second place, and no Republican has ever won both Iowa and New Hampshire. Very different states, very different demographically, in terms of much more politically moderate New Hampshire, and lost the nomination. It just hasn't happened. To a lot of people, Trump's nomination is looking inevitable.
I know there's a sense that it's over, but there's actually a lot of election to come. We've only had 230,000 voters cast their ballots for Donald Trump. That's less than the size of St. Paul. And I think the big thing here is Nikki Haley in the last week in New Hampshire has discovered a significant anti-Trump coalition that she can build on. This includes independents and includes the better educated, includes women. And Donald Trump appears to be, kind of locked in on those who are angry, who buy into the denial of the 2020 election results, and see their economic situation as stagnating or falling back. Now, there's now more money coming into Nikki Haley's campaign, and we're looking at a series of elections coming up that may actually play to Nikki Haley's advantage. So the bottom line is she is staying, and I think she's got a chance. It's not a good chance, but she's got a chance, an opportunity to make this a race.
Well, how about South Carolina? That's the next big Republican contest. She is down in the polls there, double digits, and every major Republican in South Carolina has abandoned her, and they're all endorsing Donald Trump.
Yeah, and this is not new territory for Nikki Haley. She's run and become governor despite endorsements for the more establishment candidates. Running behind in South Carolina is familiar to her. She is now going to be up with a whole new set of ads. They're going to blanket the state. The new money coming in is going to allow her to also put more muscle into organizing. So that race, like New Hampshire, could tighten up. Remember, in the last 2 months, Nikki Haley more than doubled her support in the state of New Hampshire. So she's got room to grow and, again, a chance to really pose a challenge to Donald Trump.
A chance, you say, but not a good one. Let me ask you about the Democrats. President Joe Biden did really well considering that he was a write-in candidate, and Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips coming in around 19%, really shy of what he was talking about finishing in the mid-20s. Your thoughts on that race?
I don't think it's much of a race. This is a contest where Joe Biden's going to win. He'll win overwhelmingly. The next races in South Carolina and elsewhere, we may see Dean Phillips coming in well less than what he got in New Hampshire. Dean Phillips is already talking about, third party run. I don't think this is a serious challenge to Joe Biden. The next question is, does Dean Phillips want to play a spoiler role by running as a third party candidate and possibly drawing away Democratic votes from Joe Biden? That'll be the next question. But I don't think there's any challenge, seriously, from Dean Phillips.
You know, I watched a number of Dean Phillips' speeches yesterday. I'm not sure a lot of other people were watching them too, but he says over and over again that he, Dean Phillips, is the only candidate who can beat Donald Trump in a general election. Do you see that sticking at all? I mean, Joe Biden has beaten Donald Trump once, and yes, the polls show him down, but there's still a lot of time.
There's a lot of time, and when you start to factor in with voters the possibility that Donald Trump is convicted, you begin to see quite a bit of support among Republicans and many independents slip away from Donald Trump. So I think probably the odds favor Joe Biden heading into the fall, though it's a long way off and there's going to be a lot of challenges. Dean Phillips is searching for a reason to run. At this point, it looks more and more like a vanity candidacy.
All right, Larry Jacobs, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Good to be with you.
Up next, perspectives from Democratic analyst Abou Amara and Hamline Law Professor David Schultz. Joining us right now, Democratic political analyst Abou Amara. What about New Hampshire? Big wins for Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah, another big win for Donald Trump. He showed he's got strength not just with the Republican base, but with independent leaning folks, at least in New Hampshire. And Joe Biden won a write-in campaign, something that often politicians aren't able to do. And so it looks like we're heading for a rematch of the 2020 election.
Donald Trump seems almost unstoppable. I mean, New Hampshire and Iowa are very different states. New Hampshire, much more moderate. Donald Trump has a firm hold on the Republican Party. Nobody has ever won Iowa and New Hampshire and not won the nomination. Is this inevitable that he's going to be the nominee?
Yeah, I think it's a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump will be the nominee. And I think it's for two reasons. One of which is he's winning with base conservatives. If you look at New Hampshire, he won 70% of self-identified Republicans, whereas Nikki Haley only won roughly a quarter of that same number. And so Nikki Haley can't win the Republican primary without Republicans. And so I think Donald Trump has shown both in Iowa and New Hampshire that he really has a grip on the pulse of the Republican voting base.
All right, let's talk about the Democrats. Dean Phillips from Minnesota got barely 20%. The final votes aren't in yet, but that's barely meeting the threshold of what he said he expected to make in the mid-20s. This looks like a big win for Joe Biden. I mean, he was a write-in candidate, and he did really well. I think Democrats, obviously in New Hampshire, embracing Joe Biden.
That's right. I think Joe Biden, without much of an infrastructure, not much of a campaign, and his name not even being on the ballot, and still being able to get a clear supermajority, winning by over 40 points. I think that's a pretty clear win for Joe Biden, and really calls into question the viability of the Dean Phillips campaign. You know, he says he's going to move on, and his whole campaign is about data. Well, there isn't much data showing that he has a viable path to the Democratic nomination.
What Dean Phillips keeps saying, and he's saying it again, even in the aftermath of a pretty, middling showing in New Hampshire, is that he, Dean Phillips, is the only one to be able to beat Donald Trump. The thing is, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump once. I mean, how does it look going forward if, in fact, that is the showdown? Donald Trump, Joe Biden 2.0.
Well, yeah. So Dean Phillips' argument essentially is that the polls show that Joe Biden can't win. Well, first, reality, like you said, the 2020 election tells us that's not true. And second is Democrats have to be just as focused on moving the polls as they are by following the polls. Dean Phillips is only talking about following the polls. And so you're going to see the president over the next 9-10 months and key surrogates begin to focus on how do we move those polls with key groups of voters so that he can get 270 electoral votes in November.
All right, talking about key votes for the president, he is coming to Superior, Wisconsin this week to talk about the Blatnick Bridge, which is the big bridge. It's going to get redone between Superior and Duluth. The Biden administration helped secure $1 billion, also with the help of Congress. How much is this kind of saying, hey, Wisconsin, hey, Minnesota, look what I did for you?
Well, good policy can be good politics. And so I think this is an example of the Biden administration saying, this is what Biden can do for you. He's coming to the Midwest. Wisconsin is a key state of his electoral strategy. Minnesota also plays a role in that key electoral strategy, in making sure people understand what his administration has done, not in abstract terms, but in real terms, and hoping that that's a reminder to folks to, hey, you know what, come back home to the Democratic Party, to Joe Biden, to this administration, so that hopefully he can get another 4 years.
Nikki Haley saying she is moving on. What's so bleak looking about Nikki Haley is that the next big contest is her own state, South Carolina, where she's down by double digits, and all the prominent Republicans, the senators, the governor, are all endorsing President Trump.
Yeah, I feel like right now she's got a strong posture about saying we're moving ahead. I suspect in the next week or 2 weeks, donors will come to her and explain, hey, a big loss in your home state wouldn't just end this campaign. That could potentially damage her moving forward if she has any future ambitions. You don't want to lose your home state by a number. So I think it's still possible for her to drop out. But South Carolina, for sure, is the last stand. If she's not able to win there, this race is over.
All right. Well, Abou Amara, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks.
Joining us right now is political analyst and also a professor of law from Hamline University, David Schultz. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Esme. Thanks for having me.
All right. Donald Trump won. He was not stopped by Nikki Haley.
He wasn't stopped. And what's really interesting at this point is that if you look at approximately where the percentages are, it's revealing a party that's what? A pretty evenly divided or slightly favoring Trump, but somewhere around 55-45%. And we've consistently saw that in Iowa, where Trump got a little bit over 50%, everybody else a little bit less than 50%. So A, he's got a stronghold on the party, but B, it's still a very divided Republican Party. But it looks like at this point, there's probably no stopping him in terms of getting the nomination.
Yeah, I did see one figure that I thought was really interesting. Apparently, nobody has ever won both Iowa and New Hampshire and gone on to not also win the nomination. I mean, it's very difficult to see how he can be stopped. If you go ahead to the next big primary, South Carolina, Nikki Haley is trailing him big time in all the polls.
Yeah, and it's ironic because she was the governor of South Carolina.
Right.
And in many ways, what's happened is that South Carolina has, like the rest of the Republican Party, more firmly moved into the Trump camp. And so she's in real danger of losing in her own home state. And there are many people who are speculating and saying that, will she perhaps drop out before South Carolina to save the embarrassment? Although in her concession speech on Tuesday, she said, onward to South Carolina. So I just don't see an equation right now where she can really dislodge Donald Trump and prevent him from the inevitability of getting the nomination.
On the Democratic side, it really doesn't look like Dean Phillips got the shot in on President Biden that he really wanted to get. I mean, he's just hovering around 20%. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, it's interesting is that he said earlier in the day on Tuesday that if he gets 20%, it's a victory for him. He's going to go on. Most of us don't consider that to be a victory, where you had him on the ballot, you had Biden as a write-in, and Biden's going to get somewhere around 75 to 80%. There really isn't much of an indication that the 20% or so that Phillips is going to get is going to have the same impact, for example, that Eugene McCarthy had upon Lyndon Johnson in 68, where there it was a surprise at about 42%. So same thing here. Phillips may go on, but his path right now in terms of dislodging Biden is very narrow, because they go on to South Carolina, and we're going to look at Biden being exceedingly strong in South Carolina, and it doesn't get any easier for Phillips.
And also in Nevada, he's not on the ballot. He missed that deadline.
Correct.
And South Carolina certainly is where Joe Biden, who lost both in Iowa and New Hampshire in 2020, won big in South Carolina. That launched him on to the nomination and obviously to the presidency. There doesn't seem any reason to believe that that won't happen again this time.
You're absolutely correct. And the reason why South Carolina is really the first state for the Democrats is because what? They set up, that is Joe Biden and the Democrats set up South Carolina to go first because simply he's so strong there. So I think the real question now becomes for Phillips, how much longer does he also last? And does he want to survive until Super Tuesday, including facing the prospects of not doing very well in the state of Minnesota when Minnesota also votes?
All right. Well, so far, it looks like we're heading towards a rematch of Trump and Biden. Thank you so much, Professor David Schultz. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Esme. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, a Republican perspective from GOP analyst Amy Koch. She insists the inevitability of Donald Trump winning the nomination is, well, not inevitable. Joining us right now from New Hampshire is Republican analyst Amy Koch. Your thoughts, Amy, on this result? Donald Trump won decisively.
Yeah. He has won. And so congratulations to that team. He also won in Iowa, right? So he's moving on. But I think about 2 days ago, this became a head-to-head contest, which is something that's very different than anyone has seen before in a Republican primary with President Trump. And so I think that, Nikki Haley started back, single digits, and she's moving up in New Hampshire now into the 40 percentile, and headed into South Carolina. So you have to say this was a big night and kind of put a little bit of a crack in the sort of Trump inevitability.
Well, what about South Carolina? That's the next big primary, but and you've got Nevada too before that. But the polls show her way down to Trump in her own state.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a big fight in South Carolina, and I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think it's necessarily going to be easy for either of them. But then after South Carolina, you got Super Tuesday. So the question will be, can Haley sustain this momentum that she's been gathering, particularly in the last few days? What does that mean for South Carolina? And then, does she do well enough in South Carolina to get that ticket to Super Tuesday, where the board gets a lot bigger?
I know that you're obviously up in New Hampshire. I don't know if you've seen some of the exit polling, but the exit polling on who voted for Trump, overwhelmingly, it was Republicans that supported Trump. Nikki Haley was scoring with independents. Does that work going forward?
Well, it works in New Hampshire in particular because they are just fiercely independent, right? Live free or die. And so they have over 40, I think it's around 42% are not registered, just as independent. Right. So it's a little hard for folks to dig into those numbers because so many people, Republicans very much included, do not register in the state of New Hampshire, which I kind of love about them.
Right. There are a lot of Republicans, though, and pundits who are saying this is a sign of Donald Trump's inevitability in getting to that nomination. I mean, no one has ever won both the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary and not gotten their party's nomination.
Sure. Well, Donald Trump is essentially running as an incumbent. He's a former president, and he's got a lot of kind of the establishment behind him, and so that actually makes a lot of sense, right? He should be the person that everybody thinks. I think we're going to see what the final margin is here, and if it's if it's in single digits, I think that people are counting their chickens a little before they're hatched. That's what I will say. And again, this is closing the gap and about momentum, so something to watch.
And so the big target now, it sounds like you think, is Super Tuesday, which of course includes Minnesota.
I'm not that deeply inside either camp to know. I mean, it's about momentum. It's about money. There's all kinds of things that go into this factor, right? Everyone thought that DeSantis, in fact, he said he was going on after Iowa, but then all reports are that they kind of ran out of money, and that was a big factor in him deciding to step out 2 days ago. So there's so much movement in this race and has been. It'll be interesting to see how it settles out now with President Trump and Governor Haley just head to head.
All right. Although it sounds like you do not think this is over on the Republican side.
Well, no, Governor Haley was pretty clear that it's not over. So she gets
Right.
he gets to keep running and the people get to keep voting. And
All
we'll
right.
see. But yeah, definitely, Trump's won too. You got to give it to him.
All right. Listen, thank you so much, Amy Koch, for joining us from New Hampshire. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Esme.
The next big contest is South Carolina, the state that launched Joe Biden to the nomination 4 years ago. It's also Nikki Haley's home state, but in polls, she is trailing Donald Trump there by double digits, and the state's most prominent Republicans have all left her side to endorse Trump. Then on February 27th, it's Michigan's primary, and on March 5th, Super Tuesday, when 16 states, including Minnesota, will vote. We will be following it with you all the way. This does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@wcco.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. on CBS News Minnesota. And on Friday nights, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.